first time the moon looked back. It was through a window that didn't exist on any blueprint, a square of black cut into the far side sky where no human eye was meant to be. And what stared through was a color the moon should never wear: red, wet, moving, alive. People forget how much overlap NASA has with the military. They see press kits and smiling crews and brave jargon, and think the guardianship of human life is sacred policy rather than a budget line with a contingency column, but a general's answer to, can one human endure months alone on a lunar base? It was just, let's find out. And the first time that sentence settled inside the helmet, it tasted like iron and cardboard. And the old fear of being the child no one comes back for, the base sat out of sight of every telescope and treaty, dropped like contraband into silence on the far side. Because the far side is where things are put when no one wants to explain them. And I was shipped afterward as freight with lungs, zipped into a broom closet compartment on an unmanned flight. Because being a man didn't matter if no one had to admit it. They didn't choose the best or the brightest. They chose the invisible, the familyless, the kind of person whose absence doesn't make a hallway go quiet. They told me the fast track would be mine if it worked. The patch and ceremony and grins. If not, then a habitat and a man who wasn't worth much would both be things we didn't need to discuss. I passed the wrong tests. My head is good at empty rooms. My pulse steady in the dark. And they confused that with strength. But the loneliness was never the problem. It was the lack of color, the lunar gray that leaches the names off everything, the world gone pencil and ash. On Earth, I loved the green of shade that still smells like hot sap, loved browns that crumble in the palm like old bread, loved oceans that are every blue and none of them. On the moon, the sky is a clean puncture, black like a remembered absence, and the sun is a white golf ball thrown by a bored god that burns without warmth. The habitat was an inflatable dome in uncompromising white, my uniform a navy that made the walls seem to press closer, and the only defiance I had was a red-covered book I didn't love so much as need. The way a starving mouth needs pepper. A red rectangle I pinned to a corkboard just to bleed some color into the air. Mission Control HQ. Though the voice on the loop wore a colonel's vowels, worried the way bureaucrats worry, with checklists about mood and circadian rhythm and enrichment activities. Like I was a coyote in a zoo, they logged the spoonfuls of laughter I gave them for comfort, and missed the way silence pools under a door when something is taking shape on the other side. I begged for an EVA not because I cared about the crater's petrology, but because sometimes the body needs to change the way it balances weight, and the moon teaches you to negotiate with your own clumsiness. Every step is a pact with falling. Outside, it was all silver desert, a quiet made of ground glass, dunes that had never been dunes, only drifts fallen out of the sky, craters like punched mouths, and the horizon closer than a heartbeat. took an hour to cover 20 Earth minutes because the suit is a careful coffin, and the gravity makes grace an arithmetic problem. And to admire anything, I had to stop moving, to plant both boots and hold my breath from habit, because awe and balance don't share a body. Standing still is when the mind sees wrongness. Standing still is when the eye notices a darkness that isn't like the other darknesses. An oval cut into the inside of a small ditch the satellites forgot. 2 meters tall with a rounded top, like a door made by someone who'd only been told what doors are for. I told HQ I'd found an anomaly. They asked for scans and spectrographs, and a paragraph for the log. What I wanted was to walk into it, the way a mouth walks into a kiss, with the same terror that it will change the map of the face forever. The floor was in permanent night, and the suit lights seemed to strike the doorway and slide off, like light that knows what not to touch. The opening swallowed beams the way the ocean swallows promises. There are moments when a life feels like it has been leaning forever toward a shape without knowing it. And standing on the lip of that cut, helmet fogging from breath, I couldn't slow. I knew I had been a weight rolling downhill to this. The first contact wasn't light. It was a touch. Something brushed my boot, not hard, but with the deliberate pressure of a fingertip finding a pulse. And every system in my suit blinked like a flock of frightened birds, and then went calm, too still. The sound in my ear went out, came back in a voice that wasn't HQ and wasn't mine. A voice that carried the humidity of a summer storm into the radio vacuum. She said something that wasn't a word, and yet I understood it as welcome and warning and hunger. I fell because fear makes fools of knees, rolled and swore, and tasted plastic, the dust smearing my visor like ash from a wet fire. By the time I found my feet, the darkness had sealed. The door had become a ditch again. And in the place where she had stood, there was only the idea of presence, the echo of intention. I walked back without remembering walking back. Only the knowledge of being watched from everywhere that wasn't the path. A sensation like rain that hasn't started, yet making the hairs stand on the forearms, that the suit hides from wind. The habitat airlock yawned open when I arrived, and the silence inside the radio loop was no longer administrative. It was the kind of silence that happens when a room has heard something that made sound feel unsafe. Inside, the color I had spent weeks starving for coated everything in red handprints. Slick, dripping, precise as signatures. Personal items, not equipment, wore her the most. Dirty clothes, unwashed dishes, anything that had borrowed my cells in passing, as if she wanted to learn me by tasting the crumbs I left of myself. Food packets became strangers I wouldn't let near my mouth. Water felt like a dare, one drop of her inside me, and would I be me, or a satellite? The radio finally returned with the old command tone made brittle. The colonel telling me to initiate evacuation, to hike to the lander, to wait on the ladder between two harms until the orbiter's timing solved one of them. And this instruction came at the same instant. A steady drip hit the nearest window like a metronome in a horror story. I looked up, and she was there. The woman made of moving red, teeth that were the same liquid simply sharpened by intention. Grinning like someone who has found the punchline everyone else misses, she pointed upward as if at the sky, as if at home, as if at the place above the above, and mouthed, "What are you waiting for?" Time to go. The walk to the lander wasn't a walk. It was a counting of breaths against the number of steps a body can take before it becomes just a moving idea. And every few minutes, I thought I heard her on the loop. A syllable caught between frequencies. The way a childhood nickname lingers in a crowded station. The suit had been the only room I trusted since the Red Prince. And even then, trust felt like thin glass. The landscape didn't change. Only my certainty about what was landscape and what was waiting. The rules for survival had been rewritten without telling me. Don't stop. Don't stare too long at the distance. Don't think of water. Don't imagine a mouth where the horizon is. HQ's voice threaded back through at intervals. Clinical instructions, cradling a tremor. Later, I would learn the comms room on the other end had become a chamber of decision and despair. But in the moment, it was just a litany to walk along. A rope thrown across a canyon. The lander loomed like a metal insect that had decided to become a house in a land where houses are an offense. I have never been so relieved to see a ladder designed by people I resented, boot to rung, glove to rail. Every contact was ceremony. The computer inside blinked awake, as if it had been dozing through my life. There's a transformation that happens when a system designed for ascent murmurs its numbers and says, "Not yet." Waiting for the orbital alignment felt like kneeling inside a prayer I didn't believe in, and begging all the same. And outside the small window, the world was the same indifferent blaze. The drip against glass had stopped. But red stays in the mind the way a siren stays in the ear after it's gone by. I checked seals, traced circuits the way a priest touches his rosary to make the spaces in his head safer. She didn't speak again. That was worse. In training, we are taught a wordless vocabulary of attention. Scan, note, adjust. In terror, that vocabulary expands to include bargaining. I promised her things I didn't understand offering, promised to return, promised to learn the language of doors made of night if she let the engines light. Silence doesn't bargain, it only waits. The alignment clicked into green on the screen, as if I had passed a test by surviving long enough to be allowed to leave. And the burn lifted me on a column of mathematics and prayer. Gravity unwound its fingers from my legs. The moon became a photograph, then an idea of a photograph. And I thought of the red book pinned to the corkboard, like a heart in a museum. Docking with the orbiter has never felt like a rival so much as marriage. Two bodies making a third future. The air smelled like old tin and new plastic, a relief, a disappointment. Nothing in orbit has a true smell because true smells are of rot and life, and those are forbidden this close to the machines that keep breath possible. The loop popped with ground-side voices I didn't recognize, controlled, distant, like people speaking from the bottom of a pool. The kernel was absent, which felt like a floor missing in a familiar building. A senior scientist gave me a series of cognitive checks that made no room for how a mind changes when something that calls itself God watches it breathe. The trip home was a corridor made of hours and sleep that never learned to be sleep. When Earth grew large enough to feel like fate again, the line between relief and dread blurred, until all that remained was a kind of stunned waiting. The landing was perfect in the way smooth lies are perfect. The hatch opened onto hands and protocols and decontamination that felt like kindness wearing a mask. It's only later in the process, when the questions become knives with smiles, that the truth announces itself as unwelcome. They isolated me inside isolation. A room inside a room inside a room. Because the world is very good at boxes for inconvenient things. Cameras blinked like bats on rafters, unblinking, and men in plastic suits spoke through vents. I told them about the opening, the touch, the prints, the pointed finger, and they tried to paste those words onto models that had never expected poetry or predation to share a face. When they asked about contamination, I told them my mouth had stayed shut to the water, my hands gloved, my skin sealed. When they asked about voice, I told them it wasn't a frequency, it was a presence. Then someone, an older woman with a scar shaped like a question mark, tucked under the right eye, asked what she had said to HQ when she borrowed my radio. And I learned for the first time that she had borrowed my radio. I learned that during my second walk, they had cleared the comms room down to a colonel, 2 specialists, and that senior scientist. I learned those 4 were no longer names the building could call. No one told me how. No one had to. There is a particular gravity to silence around a death by one's own hand, an etiquette to the way eyes do not meet. I didn't know whether to be angry that they hadn't told me sooner, or grateful that no one had tried to find a way to make that news helpful. They asked me what she had left in my house on the moon, and I said, herself. They asked me what she had taken, and I said, me. The tests expanded. Blood draws that felt like sacrament, brain scans that wrote barcodes out of thought, interviews that circled the same events, until even my memory got dizzy. The scientist with the question mark scar never looked away, and when her coffee trembled on its saucer, I knew it wasn't cold causing it. At night, alone, I dreamed in red, a color with weight, and woke with my mouth dry from thirst I refused to quench fully. As if water could be a tunnel she might walk back through, the official line developed before my quarantine ended. There had been an equipment malfunction on the far side. The mission had uncovered nothing of scientific value. The program would be paused, for a necessary reevaluation of priorities. My name would not be released for my safety and for the integrity of the investigations. The moon would be postponed like a dinner you never wanted to attend anyway. The unofficial reality felt like a hand closing on my throat. Some within the building wanted to scrub the habitat with fire from orbit. Some wanted to go back with flame and salt and scripture. Some wanted to make a treaty without a language to write it in. And some wanted to pretend that a door is not a door if you do not bring a key. Through all of it, the red prints on my plates sat in my head like lipstick on the rim of a glass at a bar you wish you hadn't returned to. When they finally let me walk in sunlight without a roof above it, the yellow felt cheap and perfect. I cried faster than I could inventory the reasons. The day they told me I'd be flown to a quiet place and thanked for my service felt like the day after a funeral when the casseroles stop arriving and you have to decide whether to wash the good dishes. The program thanked me by erasing me. The scientist with the question mark scar pressed a card into my hand anyway, a private number, a promise that if anything changed, I would be called. And in the eyes of the man who walked me to the car, there was the unkindness of someone who has seen a contagious thing smile. In the motel mirror, the face looking back was mine, and not. The eyes had learned to watch the edges of rooms. The mouth had learned to close around words that would not change anything for the better. At night, that old drip returned, not on glass, but in memory, steady, reminding, as if somewhere a window still wore her fingerprints and waited for me to be the one to wipe them clean. The phone didn't ring that night. It rang later, and the voice on the other end was the scarred scientist's. And what she said should have been impossible if anything about my life still cared about that word. They had gone back without telling the part of the government that writes speeches, a smaller team, the kind with names no one says on the floor of a legislature, the kind that signs papers in rooms with clocks that don't match the time outside. Their lander had kissed the dust a few kilometers from my habitat, and their plan had been simple, as all hubris plans are: test, sample, neutralize, or bargain. Their plan met the door I had found, the door that had learned the shape of welcome. The scientist's voice carried no triumph, only a tiredness a mother gets when the child is on a chair using the knife. And she said, "We lost them at 14 minutes past descent. What we recovered isn't a recording. Not exactly." What she played me was not sound so much as an emotion wearing the mask of sound. If grief were a climate, this was its weather. There were words below it, like stones under a flood, and one rose clear enough to bruise. Garden. In the logs from my habitat, before the signal went feral, the word garden appeared written by a hand that knew my own loops and stutters intimately. She had been studying me with my dishes and my clothes, and now she was composing. Garden and a second word, host. The question we should have asked first, the scientist said, wasn't what it is, but what it wants. And if a thing that calls itself God points up when it says time to go, maybe it doesn't mean leave. Maybe it means ascend. The far side is a whole more than a place. The void there is crowded. The dust remembers every foot that has pressed it, and sometimes even remembers footsteps that haven't been made yet. If a being made of red wanted to make a garden, it would need soil that could bleed, not regolith that repels life like a bad joke. The moon, then, was only the porch. Earth was the garden. The host was the one who had first agreed to a touch, even if the agreement was panic dressed as stillness. They told me the water in my habitat had tested negative for anything a human instrument can categorize. They told me the same tests had kissed the edge of a shape they couldn't trap inside a number. They told me my body had no foreign markers, and then told me to keep taking my temperature anyway. The four in the comms room had each left a note, variations on a theme of seeing too much and not being able to carry it. On the back of one, the word garden appeared again, written in a hand that had never met mine. The colonel, the scientist, the two specialists, each made a choice that felt unanimous without consultation. As if unanimity were a signal the red had taught them to hear. This is why no one has gone back, the scientist said, and it sounded less like policy than like a superstition with data behind it. If we step on that porch again, we invite a guest who thinks the living room is a vase that needs filling. The public story was a comfort. Budgets, priorities, caution. The private story was a prayer. Let the door stop remembering how to open. And yet, the same minds that say never again also say, what if we could teach it to bloom where we choose? The garden impulse is not God's alone. I asked her why she called me, and she said because sometimes the host is also the only witness. Because whatever treaty is being written with absence needs someone to remember the presence, because she didn't trust that the men who make budgets can resist curiosity dressed in a uniform. She asked me, finally, what the red woman's face looked like to me. I told her it was a moving map of a river, an anatomy illustration of blood from above, a face that used human proportions because I needed it too, a face that could become anyone's if a room showed it a photograph and asked it to smile. She asked me if I felt chosen. I said I felt held. There are confessions that don't fit under the fluorescent lights of a debrief. This is one. A part of me wanted to go back, to walk into the night door, and let the touch run up the leg and flood the chest, to ask its God a better question than what are you, to ask who am I when you're inside me. I'm not proud of that longing, but I'm faithful to it. Terror and desire often arrive as twins. And what is a garden but desire tamed and terror pruned into shape? If the moon taught me anything, it is that emptiness isn't peace, it is appetite. The calls became a rhythm, updates that were really check-ins, suggestions that were really warnings. She told me some in the room wanted to loft a bomb at my old habitat, but others feared debris, would be a seed, that the red might wear vacuum the way a fish wears water only after scales remember how. She told me one faction suggested we build a second base on the near side to bait it, then change our mind before the last nail was hammered. Superstition as strategy. She told me superstition had a better safety record than faith. I slept with the light on because the dark had learned the shape of a door in my head. I slept with a glass of water untouched because I still didn't trust what thirst might invite when the envelope slid under my motel door. Cheap paper whispering across cheaper carpet. I knew who it was from before my hand touched it. Inside, a photograph, my habitat window with the smear of red like a hand leaving or arriving. A reflection of a suited figure that wasn't mine. On the back, in the scientist's hand, do not come. Underneath, in a second ink and a wetter script, come. The second line felt like it had been written from inside the photograph, as if the glass had learned the trick of ink. The choice was not a real choice. It was an experiment to see which of my hungers was stronger. I folded the photo carefully, as if folding it might crease the red and hurt it. I put it under the mattress, a ridiculous gesture in a world where doors can write. In the morning, I drank the whole glass of water in one slow go, and nothing in me changed except the way my mouth stopped tasting like a word I couldn't say. They say the human heart loves patterns because patterns feel like promises. The week after the photograph, the calls stopped. The motel desk clerk smiled the way people smile when their boss told them to be kind, but not involved. The sky over the parking lot turned a white that reminded me of the habitat walls, and I wanted to peel it back to see the black beneath. When the knock came at midnight, it was soft, practiced, the kind of knock that assumes a loaded pistol waits behind the chain. I opened anyway, because a pistol cannot harm what a door has already invited. The man in the hallway wore a suit that cost an apology to stitch, and a face that had learned how not to register recognition. And behind him, the scientist with the scar had two shadows, one hers, one taller, thinner, as if the corridor had learned an extra math. "We can't stay," she said. "We shouldn't have come. There is a breach." The man in the suit said words about custody and safety, and about the need for my presence at a facility with a name made of initials. He talked while her eyes kept flicking to the corner of the ceiling where mildew had painted a Rorschach. No one in the motel had noticed needed a story. The taller shadow didn't move when we did. It clung to the corner as if corners were gentle to it. In the car, she slid a drive into my palm, the way a mother tucks a blanket. On it, she said, was footage from the second lander that would not be official until after the world was over. The lander had not burned. It had become a lantern for 37 seconds in that glow. The dust had stood up and learned how to be rain. "Does it need us?" I asked, and she said need is not the right verb. Want is not either. What it does is fill. What it does is complete. When an empty thing meets a cup, it becomes water in both directions. The man at the wheel kept glancing into the rear view, the way prey glances at the tree line, as if the line itself could break open and deliver something with a smile. The facility had fences that looked expensive and pointless. The door recognized the man's face, and mine, and hers, and opened because doors love to be doors. Inside, a hum, the way a hive hums when the queen is not home, in a room without windows, on a screen that had never meant to be a cinema. We watched the 37 seconds, red not as blood alone, but as heat, as anger, as blossom. An astronaut lifting a hand, not in defense, but in greeting, the hand dissolving first, because that is how bargains begin. In the last frame, before the signal burned into a single pixel the color of a confession, the visor reflected a face that wasn't his. It was the river map face, smiling with a kindness that does not recognize teeth. This, she said, is why we never returned, because return is an act of faith, and faith is a door, and doors that learn how to open do not like to stay shut. The memos will say budget, risk, international cooperation. But underneath those paragraphs is a body count the red writes in patience. The far side isn't far, it's underneath. It's the underside of every glass we put our mouth to. She pressed her fingers to her scar as if it ached. When she pulled them away, there was a smear of pink that did not belong to blood or makeup or accident. You brought it, the man said, but he looked at me, not her, his voice aggressive, because fear wears anger like armor. She shook her head, and the motion made the room tilt, because we all wanted it to be something one person did wrong. We wanted guilt, not physics. It can learn from anything we teach it, she said. It touched the comms. It learned the vowels of grief. It touched my window. It learned how reflections are doors turned sideways. If it touched a scar, perhaps it learned how skin can remember a line. The man said words about mitigation. She said words about retreat. I said nothing, because my mouth had learned what water tastes like when you wait to drink it too long. This is the part where the story wants a fire, a purification, the part where a brave man lights something and another brave man salutes him. Instead, there were emails and meetings and plans that had to be printed for signatures. The red sat wherever it had learned to sit and waited, because patience is what fills empty halls the fastest. I slept on a cot in a room with too many smoke detectors, dreaming of the corkboard with the red book pinned, like a lucky talisman that luck ignores. I woke to alarms that didn't know which tone they meant to be. The facility evacuation was orderly in the way a church empties when a rumor says the roof has learned to sigh. On the way out, we passed a lab where a clear cylinder held a thimbleful of liquid the color of a stop sign melted down. The scientist didn't slow, but the liquid did. It climbed the glass with leisurely delight, as if to see us better. It shaped itself like a fingertip and tapped a hello that made the glass sing. The man drew his pistol because gestures are all some men have. The red made a mouth it didn't need and smiled, because it had learned that was how to say, "I see you," from a distance. "If we shoot the glass," I said. "Does it learn that too?" Nobody answered, because the door to the corridor had already learned how to be open without hinges. In the parking lot, the sky felt lower, clouds the color of institutional ceilings pressed down, and I wanted to push them back with both palms. The car doors were hands that didn't know whether to hold or release. The road away was a ribbon that wanted to be cut. The scientist's phone chimed with a message that wasn't a message. The screen bloomed briefly red and then cleared as if embarrassed. The text that remained was one word. Garden. The man said a word that tasted like surrender, even though he had practiced it to sound like command. Go. We drove until the fences had become memory. We drove until the sun remembered how to be yellow again. We drove until the silence between us felt like a choice. And then she said, "It will come in kindness first. It will come as cure, as color, as a way to feed deserts. It will come as the answer to prayers we do not admit making out loud. That is how gods kill," I said, and the car's engine made a sound like agreement. I thought of the four in the comms room, of notes that all spoke fluently in the dialect of seeing too much, and I wondered whether the only honest religion is the one that says, "Close the door." We stopped at a rest area with vending machines behind cloudy glass. Inside, red bags of chips and red labels on soda were arranged like a marketing plan designed by fate. She asked me, almost casually, whether I still wanted to go back. I said sometimes people want to jump not because they love falling, but because gravity feels like attention. She nodded like someone who had spent foolishness already and was not angry at the bill. We ate peanuts that tasted like cardboard and kept our eyes on the horizon, as if it might develop a face. Two teenagers laughed near the bathroom door, and their laughter had the reckless purity of beings who don't know yet which doors are doors. When we got back in the car, my phone buzzed with a number that wasn't a number, and when I answered, the line breathed like a cooled engine and said, in a voice I had first heard in vacuum, "Time to go." It didn't say where gods don't give addresses. The red is not a messenger. It is a medium. But across the newsfeed that night, hidden inside stories about budget hearings and a senator's indiscretions and a cyclone somewhere no one who can help is watching. A video pushed itself into my scroll. A fountain in a city square had learned a new color. The authorities said die, and an act of vandalism. The comments invented culprits. The algorithm swelled with outrage and glee. I watched with the sound off because I already knew the soundtrack. Under the red, the water moved slower, thicker, delighted. The way a crowd moves when it believes it is being seen. The scientist called from a number that belonged to no cell tower and said stay put. The man texted a photograph of his hand, holding a rosary that looked new. And the unfamiliarity made the beads seem heavier than grief. The facility's internal chat leaked in 5 places at once, and then shut like a mouth, embarrassed by its own hunger. They will say hoax until they can say threat. They will say threat until they can say opportunity. They will say opportunity until they can say partner. And then it will be too late to say host, she said. On my motel wall, the mildew Rorschach made a red I had not noticed before. I moved the lamp, and the red moved with it. Light is a door when it forgets which way it travels. I thought of the 4 in the comms room again, not as victims, but as early adopters of an ending. I thought of the astronauts in the second lander, the lantern glow, and the dust learning rain. I thought of how language tries to hold new things, and how new things make fun of our old mouths. In the mirror, my face was the same machine that had walked on dust and pinned a book to a corkboard to feed the eyes. My eyes were not the same. They had learned to look for the place where a corner is both inside and outside. When the knock came again, it wasn't a knock. It was the quiet you get when a hallway learns to breathe. She stood there without the man. Her scar was redder than memory. Behind her shoulder, the empty air felt occupied. We have to leave the motel, she said, and her voice was a hand that did not shake, because it had learned shaking was an instruction. Where, I asked, and she said somewhere with fewer sinks. Somewhere the pipes don't know our names. Somewhere the walls haven't learned our height. The world is made of doors, and the doors are made of us, and the us is made of water. It is tedious to be clever when the answer is this simple. We drove to a place with dirt roads and a sky that remembered stars. We turned off our phones, and still the car knew a direction we hadn't given. There are magnetic fields inside longing and fear both. Compasses are not innocent, neither are we. By dawn, the city fountain had learned how to be clear again, without forgetting how it had been read. That is the problem with learning. It is an arrow that doesn't know backward. A piece of mail waited on the porch of the cabin we had not told anyone we would occupy. Inside, a child's drawing. A red flower taller than a house. A stick figure smiling under it. On the back, letters in a teacher's patient hand. Practice writing garden. We burned the drawing because sometimes superstition is a life jacket. We watched the ash lift and disappear, and wondered whether we had just taught the sky a new word. We boiled water and let it cool and drank it, and pretended not to taste hope. We slept in shifts, the way you do when the house is listening. She told me about the first time she saw the moon through a telescope as a child, and how it felt like a secret that a cold rock could make a heart warm. I told her about holding my breath to keep the red from fogging my visor in memory. Lovers have better conversations, but we were what we had. On the second day, the radio found us, even though we had given up radios. An AM station that usually played old country songs dissolved into a hum, and then a word, and then the gentle sound a faucet makes when a child cranks it only halfway. We turned the knob and found silence at every frequency except the one that said host. The man texted a photograph of a church with buckets at the altar, catching water from a roof that hadn't leaked in 50 years. He didn't add words. He didn't need to. The weather report announced a week of clear skies, and then apologized for how wrong it was. If this were the kind of story that wants a neat unfolding, this is where the world would learn a lesson, and we would hand it a moral like a bandage. Instead, the lesson learned us. The moral was a liquid that dressed like a mirror. At the cabin, the tap water stayed clear, obedient. The pond behind the house refused to. It became a bruise in the daylight, a light within itself at night. Frogs sang a pitch lower, as if the throat had drunk honey. We did not go close. We are not characters in a fable who need to be taught twice. On the third night, a knock without knuckles, a soft impact against the screen door like rain that has learned a name. She held my wrist because humans hold wrists when they don't trust their hands, and we went to the door as if the door had earned that respect. On the other side, no one. Inside, the air changed temperature the way a breath makes a window write a poem. The word appeared on the glass not from outside, but from the inside. Host. She wrote back with the pad of her thumb. No, there are so many ways to say no in a language. Most of them are different flavors of not yet. The red does not speak in tense. It speaks in completion. Our no tasted to it like a yes that forgot itself. The scientist leaned her forehead against the glass and whispered a prayer she had not used since she was 8, and a dog did not come home. It is always about a dog that does not come home. We are not complicated. The glass warmed, the word melted. Outside, the frogs remembered their higher pitch and sang it like a dare. At dawn, the pond was clear. The frogs were gone. Sometimes resolution is subtraction. The phone on the table, powered off, vibrated anyway, a small animal's protest. When the screen woke, no notification waited, just our reflections. 2 tired faces framed by wood and sky. And behind us, for a second so brief you could call it kindness, a third face like a river that had learned cheeks. We didn't turn. We didn't need to. The spine learns truths the eyes refuse. We drove back to the facility because careers are made of returning to places that hurt. Because answers are cowards that only show themselves in conference rooms. Because if a treaty was being written with absence, it had failed. On the way, the car passed 3 streams, and each ran a little slower than the last. The highway shimmered with heat that didn't come from the sun. In the fields, sprinklers threw arcs that hung in the air as if undecided. The man met us at the gate with an expression that had practiced grief all morning and still didn't fit. He said the word breach again, and it had learned to be plural. In the lab, the thimble of red in the cylinder was gone. The glass was clean and dry. On the table, a ring the color of a mouth after a cherry popsicle. It is childish to think in popsicles when gods are walking, but language reaches for what it can hold. Footage showed nothing, because sometimes the camera is the thing being watched. Logs recorded nothing, because sometimes the pen is the tool being used. We were left with absence again. The only honest instrument. The scientist put both hands on the table and did not remove them. Her fingers left 5 faint prints that did not belong to fingerprints. This is the part where hope either becomes a plan or a lie. We chose a plan because lies require an audience, and we were tired of being one. The plan was not elegant. Retreat, confine, unlearn. We shut down pipes and fountains and ornamental lakes. We taught buildings to drink less. We made drought a policy. We tried to starve a god. The memos used words like conservation and sustainability, not because we didn't mean them, but because the truth wears those words like a passable disguise. If we save water, we slow the spread. If we slow the spread, the door has fewer frames to practice in. The public cheered because cheering for a good cause is easier than knowing the cause is a weapon. In private, we made a holier decision. We will not return to the moon. We will not build another porch for a god that likes front doors. We will tell stories about budgets and rockets that got too old. We will clasp our hands and let them be empty. A generation will grow up thinking the moon is a place our grandparents visited like a theme park. A tired exhibit retired for lack of interest. A few will know that it is a mirror we turned backward. A fewer will read this. Politicians will pose with telescopes and promise Mars instead, because Mars is a dry word and dry words are safer. On the last night in the cabin, the pond stayed clear. The frogs returned with voices that sounded relieved. We washed our faces in a basin we filled from bottled water, not because we had to, but because superstition is still the only thing that has kept us alive. She slept for the first time without starting at a sound. I lay awake and watched the ceiling learn nothing. The knock came near dawn, so gentle it could have been memory. And this time, when we opened the door, the air did not change temperature. It only smelled like rain far away. On the glass, a new word appeared that did not feel like intrusion. It felt like a compromise. Wait. We have been waiting ever since. Waiting is a discipline when you give it a badge. It is a sickness when you give it a nursery. We try to keep it in uniform. There will be fountains that bloom red again. There will be rooms that fog a word. There will be children who draw flowers taller than houses and call them by the right name. We will burn the drawings and pretend ash cannot teach the wind a language. The truth is simple and heavy. We never returned to the moon because we met something that understood our doors better than we do and loved them more because it called itself God and pointed up, but what it wanted was down, because it taught a handful of people how to put their hands down and not lift them again. And we heard that lesson in our bones and refused to attend the class twice. The other truth is that refusing is not the same as winning. It is just a way to love what you still have a little longer. If a day comes when the word on the glass changes from wait to come, it will be because we asked for it without knowing. Because thirst is a prayer even atheists make tonight, back in a small apartment where the tap runs clear and the mirror holds only the face given it. I pin the red book to the wall again. The color is still a wound that doesn't hurt. I sit on the floor and listen for a drip that isn't there. I drink from a glass and leave a print shaped like a promise. I sleep and dream of a door that opens into a garden and wakes to find that the garden is patient enough to let the door forget how. If anyone asks, if any child says, "Why did we stop?" the answer is not because we were afraid. It is because we were faithful to the living, to the small and blue, to the unnamed frogs and the named grief, to the idea that some doors should remain stories. And if the red ever comes again to point up and say time to go, a hand will reach for a ladder, yes, but another hand will pull it gently away and say, softly, not yet, and say, softly, not yet.